Hey YouTube, I'm taking time out from making a video, a Lucifer formatted video about the Book of the Law. Aleister Crowley's The Book of the Law. And, it's a general introduction to Crowley as well. And it's pretty involved in his, there have been sleepless nights. How do I get that right? And so it's kind of nice to step away from that just for a moment and address myself to a video response made by William Draven. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. And William was concerned about the second video response I made to Michael W. Ford. I made two of them, one that Michael replied to, and then I responded to his reply, and it's the second one that William is concerned about. Now, the biggest objection I got about the Michael W. Ford videos was that basically everyone takes from Michael what they will, and no one wants to go out there and be a predator in the sense of stalking people or hurting people, this stuff. And so why am I taking it that way from Michael? Well, I could pick up from the things Michael was saying, in the video I was responding to originally, that he does allow for the lowest kinds of traits in human behavior through the vehicle of the predator's spirit. Just because someone who gets something out of his books will not take it there, and they're not of that nature and aren't attracted to that, does not mean that Michael's books or his thinking or his ideology rules it out. It doesn't. He does tell everybody to obey the law, but if you happen to be in charge of the world, then you can do whatever you want. He made a video about Hanukkah and extolled the virtues of Antiochus IV, the genocidal emperor, the last emperor of the Seleucid Empire. And he left no doubt. And it was kind of funny, kind of ironic to have these people. And they're all usually very polite. This is a very mellow crowd. And, they're just telling me, I don't think you're quite getting it. Michael's not that way. Michael's nice. And I do not doubt it. But while people were saying this to me, Michael was making a video where he was singing the praises of Antiochus IV. There's no difference between Antiochus IV and Hitler or Mussolini or Stalin or Mao. It's just someone most of you've never heard of. And so if you're just listening to his whitewash of it and not fact-checking this, you're not going to know how outrageous it was, what he was doing, okay? Michael certainly romanticizes genocidal killers, okay, if they're the right kind of genocidal killer. Okay, William's position is that Michael's talking about a very generic principle, and I'm being too specific with it by trying to apply it to a socio-economic critique of oppressor and oppressed that William associates with a Marxist social criticism. Okay, he's not calling me a political Marxist. He's just saying it's in the same vein as someone concerned about class stratification. Okay, that's what he means about it. All of us over here in America, we hear Marxist and well, never mind. Okay. William is obviously not a Yank. But to all you Yanks, you know, you're the majority of whom are watching this, you know, you're Americans. He's not calling me a communist. So he's talking about a generic principle, according to William, and it's a solitary process. So since it's so solitary, it's about an initiation that's done in seclusion. It doesn't have any reference to other people one way or another, okay? At least it doesn't start out that way. And I acknowledge that for most of you out there, what Michael is always talking about is a process. It's a process of individuation. It's a process of focusing on a goal. Like a predator, you're hunting and nothing's going to get in your way. And I get it. And I acknowledge that in the video. So I don't know as there's any disagreement. I didn't emphasize it, but I did mention it. And I don't know as William is picking up on that. But William does say that it does carry over to the social sphere, because you're involved in this process and you're out there interacting with people, so it carries over. But then he says the predator soul spirit is a part of nature. You see it in nature all the time. And I would say to that among a pack of lions or a pack of gorillas or a pack of chimpanzees, there's a kind of a pecking order. But even there, especially like with chimpanzees, they're closer to us in terms of evolution, you'll see that often it's the smartest chimp who rules, not necessarily the biggest one. And so, hey, even there with the nature analogy, I would have to make some qualifications as to how valid the predator soul spirit is. The predator itself does not prey on its own. So there's that right there. See, that's a big hole in the predator soul spirit vibration. Is, well, if we don't eat each other, why do we behave toward one another as we're prey to one another? Okay? We eat animals and we eat plants. We don't eat each other, and yet we still treat each other as though we were objects to be consumed. Animals don't do this. No animal treats a fellow species as if it were prey. You only see that amongst starving rats, where you see instances of rape as well amongst starving rats, because it's aberrant behavior. It's not behavior in balance with the ecosystem. It was always a very superficial approach to the theory of biological evolution. The only social Darwinian thinker that's still of any influence would be Ayn Rand, and she's more about the personal-centered autonomy of the individual that William is about in his video. I was influenced by Ayn Rand when I was transitioning away from my religious upbringing, and we could talk about that sometime. But let's understand that Randianism relies on the pretension that Ayn Rand is the greatest philosopher since Aristotle, and there were none in between that were saying anything valid. I mean, that's where you have to be coming from for Randianism to work. So right there, I think most of us who know anything about philosophy would have a little bit of a problem. The big word in biological evolution is adaptation. The biggest and baddest do not necessarily rule any more than the biggest and baddest chimp necessarily rules. Okay, it just doesn't necessarily work out that way. How it works out is if you can adapt, you survive, and if you can't adapt, you don't survive. Now, an example of this is all these past civilizations, these ancient civilizations that Michael romanticizes. The Assyrians, okay, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Macedonians, the Romans, all these guys, all right? He eulogizes them and wants their pantheons of gods to be revived in this day and age. And we will look up to Zeus and Marduk, you know. For me, there's not a dime's worth of difference between Zeus and Marduk and Yahweh. But that's another discussion for another time. It's just these militaristic ego projections. In fact, Zeus and Marduk are much worse than Yahweh is for that kind of thing. But that's neither here nor there. It's about adaptation, okay? It's about survival, okay? It's about resisting extinction. Now, what do all the cultures that Michael admires, what do they all have in common? Well, they have two things in common. One, they all pushed around a group of people called the Judeans, whose descendants are now called, you know, Jews, Jewish people. And the second thing they have in common is all of those civilizations are extinct. Okay, and here's the final irony. Who's still here? The Jews. Okay. Now you can argue, well, the Italians are descended from the Romans and the Iranians are descended from the Persians and they're still here. They're not here in terms of where their ancestors were at. The religion of their ancestors and the ethos of their ancestors did not survive. Okay, not even in a small measure. Okay, these are people made over into the image of a Judeo-Christian ethos that took over in the Middle Ages and redefined them. Okay, so no, the Jews didn't just survive, they prevailed.